The studio lights glared down, warm and unyielding, illuminating the familiar, chatter-filled set of the View. Cameras rolled with quiet precision, capturing every gesture, every inflection of voice. Harrison Ford sat with the unmistakable weight of a career etched into his postureline shoulders, a calm, deliberate presence, eyes scanning the room like a man accustomed to both reverence and scrutiny. Across from him, Joy Behar's energy crackled in sharp contrast, animated, probing, her gestures punctuating every sentence with practiced theatricality. "Your latest film touches on some pretty heavy themes," Behar said, leaning slightly forward, her voice a mixture of curiosity and challenge. "The way it examines moral compromise, it's almost uncomfortably real." Ford inclined his head, a quiet acknowledgement. "We tried to stay honest to the story," he said, his voice even measured. "It's meant to provoke thought, not dictate judgment. The characters are flawed, as we all are." Behar smiled, but it was a sharp, calculated curve, and that honesty extends beyond the screen, I hope. "You've been remarkably silent on some of the big issues lately. People wonder where you stand. Climate, politics, you know, the stuff that shapes the world we live in." Ford's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the armrest. A flicker of something discomfort, maybe impatience, crossed his face, but his tone never wavered. "I think everyone has a role to play. Mine is primarily in storytelling, in portraying lives and dilemmas that resonate. Speaking for myself doesn't always translate to changing the world," the audience murmured, quietly, picking up the subtle tension that hung like a shadow over the set. Behar's eyes sparkled with the thrill of the tease, sensing the friction, while Ford's posture remained steadfast, grounded in the self-assurance of decades navigating public life. Behar tilted her head, voice dipping to a softer, almost conspiratorial tone. "But don't you feel a responsibility? People look up to you. They expect guidance, a stand." Ford exhaled, slow, deliberate, as if weighing the world itself in his chest. "Responsibility comes in many forms," he replied, careful, deliberate. "I hope the work I do, whether on film or quietly behind the scenes, speaks louder than any statement I could issue in passing." The cameras captured it, all the polite smiles, the nuanced glances, the subtle tightening of shoulders that spoke volumes. On the surface, it was a typical interview, a celebrated actor discussing his craft. Beneath it was a battlefield of unspoken expectations, a collision of public scrutiny and personal conviction, and an invisible line that neither guest nor host dared cross. Yet, as the conversation shifted back to the film's plot, the air remained taut, charged with an undercurrent the audience couldn't see but could feel. The seeds of discord had been sown, small but deliberate, ready to bloom into confrontation. The viewers, unaware of the storm gathering, leaned forward, drawn in by the tension that lurked behind Ford's calm, unyielding gaze. And in that quiet, electric moment, the calm before the storm settled over the View, almost deceptively so. Gaze sharpened, her smile tightening as if sensing the exact moment to strike. "But let's talk about your silence, Harrison," she pressed, her voice carrying the subtle edge of challenge. "People say it's not just quiet, it's deliberate. Are you afraid to voice your opinions on the issues shaping our country?" Ford shifted in his chair, the slight creak of leather loud against the hushed studio. He studied her, his eyes steady but measured, and when he spoke, each word felt intentional, almost a scalpel cutting through the pretense. "It's not fear, it's discernment," he said calmly. "There's a difference between weighing in for the sake of visibility and speaking when it truly matters." The studio audience stirred slightly, picking up on the undercurrent of tension. Whispers ran through the rows of cameras and crew, anticipation humming in the air. Behar leaned forward, her tone softening yet sharpening at the edges. "But you've been in the public eye for decades. People look to you as more than just an actor. You've faced challenges, you've seen injustice. Doesn't that come with a responsibility to speak?" Ford's jaw tightened, a subtle twitch betraying the patience he was trying to maintain. "Responsibility," he said slowly, "is not defined by audience expectations. It's defined by personal conviction, and by understanding the consequences of what one says in a world that twists words faster than it understands intent." Behar's smile flickered, replaced by a flash of determination. She had the floor, and she knew it. "Or perhaps you're avoiding discomfort. It's easier to stay in the shadows while everyone else fights the battles you refuse to join." The room shifted. You could almost feel the energy coiling like a spring. Ford leaned forward, his voice calm but edged with authority. "I'm not in the shadows. I choose my battles. Choosing not to speak blindly isn't avoidance, it's strategy. And sometimes, survival." A ripple ran through the audience, audible in the small coughs. the shuffle of papers, the quiet gasps that punctuated the tension. Behar's eyes narrowed, the playful energy giving way to sharper, more calculated intent, strategy or silence. Harrison, the result looks the same to most people. It looks like indifference. Ford held her gaze, unwavering. And yet appearances are not reality. Judgment based on perception alone is rarely fair, and often dangerous. For a moment, the weight of the exchange hung in the air, heavier than any scripted question or rehearsed response. Cameras lingered on the two figures, one composed but unyielding, the other pressing forward with relentless curiosity. Every word, every pause, was a subtle push and pull of power, control, and intellect. That the conversation pivoted back briefly to the film, but the undercurrent remained, like a storm cloud gathering beyond the horizon. Behar's questions had pierced the surface of civility, and Ford's answers, calm yet resolute, hinted at the tension that would soon escalate. The audience, sensing the friction, leaned in collectively, unaware that the first spark of confrontation had just ignited. Behar's eyes glinted with a mix of curiosity and challenge, as if she had sensed the subtle cracks forming in Ford's stoic exterior. But Harrison, she pressed, leaning forward, voice deliberately sharp, isn't there a point where staying quiet crosses the line into being out of touch? Ordinary people are struggling, facing inequality, climate crises, political unrest. How can you sit here and claim neutrality without seeming disconnected? Ford's fingers tightened around the armrest, the subtle tension in his posture betraying the calm he worked to project. His voice remained steady, measured, but carried an unmistakable weight. Being involved doesn't always mean speaking loudly, he said. Sometimes, it means acting where it counts, and ensuring the integrity of your actions aligns with your principles, rather than performing for an audience. Behar's lips curled in a half-smile, half-challenge. Integrity is one thing, Harrison, responsibility is another. When you have a platform, silence can speak louder than action. People look to leaders, to icons, yes, actors, for guidance. Isn't that a responsibility you're ignoring? Ford's gaze met hers, unwavering. Responsibility is not a public contract, he replied, his tone now carrying a hint of controlled intensity. It's personal, and the world rarely rewards thoughtful restraint. It prefers spectacle, noise, and applause. That doesn't make restraint wrong. It makes it uncomfortable for those who misunderstand it. Behar's voice dipped, sharper now, cutting through the polite veneer. Or maybe you just don't want to get your hands dirty. It's easier to critique the system from a distance than to face the scrutiny that comes with actual engagement. Ford's chest rose slightly as he leaned in, eyes locking with hers. Engagement is not a game of visibility, he said, each word deliberate, resonant. There is a difference between meaningful action and performative gestures. Judging me by the former while ignoring the latter is short-sighted at best. The studio audience shifted, sensing the growing intensity. The hum of anticipation was tangible, a collective awareness that civility was fraying, and that the encounter was teetering on the edge of something far more combustible. Behar's next question was pointed, almost surgical in its delivery. So, you believe the public should interpret your silence as principle, as thoughtfulness, or as apathy? Ford's jaw tightened. The controlled calm he had maintained for the first half of the interview was starting to show signs of strain. Apathy, he said slowly, is easy to accuse, but far harder to define. I choose to act where I believe it matters most, not where the spectacle demands it. A murmur ran through the audience. The cameras lingered, capturing the tension as it thickened, palpable enough to taste. Behar's smile had vanished, replaced by the sharpened edge of someone determined to draw a reaction. Ford's restraint, though still intact, carried an undercurrent of warning, a subtle message that patience had limits. The stage was set. The interview, once cordial, had transformed into a battlefield of intellect, principle, and public perception. Every word was now a weapon, every glance a calculated move, and the collision of personalities promised a confrontation that would be impossible to ignore. Behar's tone shifted, the playful challenge now replaced by something sharper, more pointed. Harrison, she said, leaning closer, voice low but carrying the weight of accusation. Some would call your stance cowardice, staying on the sidelines while the world burns around you. Isn't that just avoiding responsibility? Ford's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. The calm, deliberate man who had handled questions with polite deflection now felt the tension pressing inward, pressure that could not be ignored. He inhaled, slow and steady, letting the words form with precision. Cowardice is speaking without consideration, reacting for applause rather than conviction. I do not measure courage by volume or visibility. Behar's lips tightened. She had struck a nerve. The audience sensed it, immediately a subtle shift in the energy of the room. Cameras lingered on Ford's face, capturing the slight flush rising across his cheeks. The faint quiver of restraint barely contained behind decades of disciplined composure. You call it consideration, Behar pressed, voice sharp as a scalpel, but others call it indifference. You have influence, Harrison. You have a voice that reaches millions. To sit quietly while so many look to you, it reads as silence in the face of injustice. Ford's jaw tightened further. He leaned forward, hands gripping the armrests with quiet intensity. His voice, calm yet searing, cut through the tension. Silence in the wrong hands is indeed dangerous, but I do not live to satisfy expectation. I speak where it counts, act where it matters. And yes, sometimes that requires restraint in moments that demand spectacle over substance. The audience shifted in their seats, the subtle collective intake of breath echoing through the studio. Behar blinked rapidly, trying to regain control of the narrative. Her next words, however, carried a sharper edge, designed to provoke a visible reaction. So your choices, your silence is principle, not avoidance. Because from where I sit, it looks like fear. Ford's patience, long tested, finally frayed just enough to reveal the intensity beneath the public composure. He leaned forward, gaze locking with hers, voice low but undeniably fierce. You are out of line. The words fell like a hammer, a shockwave in the carefully choreographed rhythm of the interview. The studio, once humbly attentive, froze. Behar recoiled slightly, caught off guard by the ferocity and the sheer authority behind the declaration. The crew exchanged subtle, tense glances. The cameras captured the instant like slow motion, every eyebrow raised, every mic magnified for the viewers watching at home. The room hung in silence for a heartbeat too long, as if the air itself were holding its breath. For the first time, the polite veneer of the interview cracked, exposing the raw collision of personality, principle, and public expectation. Ford's words were not just a rebuttal, they were a boundary, a line drawn in real time before an audience that could feel every heartbeat of the confrontation. Behar's next move faltered, her practiced composure wavering under the weight of his presence. She had thought the interview was a game, a contest of wit and probing questions, but in this moment, it was clear she had awakened a force that would not be placated with clever phrasing or audience applause. The calm, the cordiality, the pretense of light-hearted exchange, all of it shattered. The storm was no longer brewing, it had arrived. The studio lights seemed to grow brighter, harsh in their intensity, as if illuminating the moment of reckoning that had quietly crept up. Harrison Ford stood slowly, deliberately, the leather of his chair groaning under the shift in weight. Every eye in the room followed him, some in shock, others in anticipation, as the tension, already taut, snapped into something irreversible. Behar blinked, mid-sentence, her words catching in her throat. Harrison, she began, but the syllable fell flat against the charged silence. Ford's gaze lingered on her for a moment, steady, piercing, the calm fury in his eyes contrasting sharply with the electric atmosphere of the studio. Without a word, he turned sharply, the sound of his shoes sliding against the polished floor echoing through the set like a drumbeat marking a decisive moment. The cameras tracked him as he moved, capturing the gravity of each step. Behar's expression shifted from surprise to a flicker of frustration, then quickly to a mixture of indignation and disbelief. Producers behind the cameras exchanged hurried whispers, their faces tight with concern. The audience, frozen in anticipation, began murmuring, sensing that this was no ordinary exchange. The murmurs grew into a low roar, the live energy of the room crackling like static. Every camera angle caught the unfolding drama, broadcasting the fracture to millions watching from living rooms across the country. Ford's stride was purposeful, each step a declaration. He didn't rush. There was no melodrama in his movement, only precision, only control. The walkout was not an impulsive act, but a carefully measured statement. Some lines, once crossed, could not be ignored. The studio felt the shift immediately, a tension so thick it seemed to press against the walls. Behar recovered slightly, trying to fill the silence with forced bravado. Well, she said, voice rising, clearly, but the words lacked force. There were shadows against the decisive, deliberate departure of a man unwilling to compromise principle for performance. As Ford reached the edge of the set, he paused briefly, a subtle gesture that conveyed both finality and reflection. He did not turn back. His face, stoic, yet charged with contained anger, told the audience everything words could not. A refusal to be coerced, a rejection of performative scrutiny, and a silent demand for respect. The cameras cut to a commercial break, but the impact lingered. Social media erupted instantly, hashtags trending before the first advert had ended. Clips of the walkout were dissected, analyzed, and debated in real time. Fans praised Ford's integrity, while critics questioned the propriety of leaving a live broadcast abruptly. The moment had transcended the studio. It had become a cultural lightning rod, a statement amplified by every retweet, every share, every news cycle. Backstage, producers scrambled to manage the fallout, the controlled chaos of television production, colliding with the unpredictability of human emotion. Crew members whispered, staff frantically checked monitors, but Ford's exit had left them powerless, a masterclass in asserting agency under pressure. The audience, both in the studio and online, was left suspended in the wake of his departure. Politeness, civility, and the expectation of decorum had been shattered in one deliberate, composed movement. The calm before had long vanished. The storm had arrived in full force. As the studio lights dimmed behind the commercial break, the reverberations of Harrison Ford's walkout echoed far beyond the polished set of The View. Within minutes, social media platforms erupted with reactions, ranging from astonishment to fervent debate. Clips of Ford's measured, decisive exit circulated rapidly, each frame dissected for nuance, the deliberate pacing, the calm intensity, the unwavering gaze that seemed to challenge anyone daring enough to question his integrity. News outlets scrambled to cover the story. Headlines ranged from "Ford stands his ground" to "Walk out on national TV sparks outrage." Pundits on morning shows analyzed every aspect of the confrontation, replaying clips in slow motion, highlighting gestures, eye movements, and the barely perceptible tension in the studio audience. The incident became a real-time case study in celebrity influence, media power, and public expectation. Fans of Ford praised his composure and the quiet strength of his stance. Finally, someone refuses to play the game, one Twitter user wrote, encapsulating a sentiment shared by thousands. The comment threads were filled with debate, some arguing that silence in a politically charged era was a disservice, others insisting that the walkout was an act of principled resistance against performative interrogation. Meanwhile, critics of Ford's actions painted a different picture. He owes the public more than silence, a columnist argued. A platform is responsibility. Leaving mid-interview undermines discourse. These critiques sparked counter-arguments that dominated comment sections and social feeds alike, creating a polarized, emotionally charged conversation that blurred the lines between celebrity, accountability, and personal boundaries. Behar herself faced scrutiny. Analysts dissected her role in the escalation, questioning whether her probing questions had crossed professional or ethical lines. Was this journalistic rigor or calculated provocation? One headline asked. While she maintained that challenging guests was her duty, public opinion was split, with some viewers applauding her courage and others condemning her approach. The incident also rippled through entertainment circles. Colleagues and fellow actors weighed in, reflecting on the challenges of navigating public life while maintaining personal principles. Conversations about celebrity responsibility, media ethics, and audience expectation dominated industry discourse. Late-night hosts joked, analysts debated, and cultural commentators framed the moment as emblematic of the tension between performance and authenticity in modern media. Behind the scenes, the production team worked tirelessly to manage the fallout. Calls to PR strategists, internal briefings, and emergency staff meetings underscored the high stakes. Every camera angle, every clip, every word spoken by Ford and Behar was now part of a narrative larger than the studio, a narrative being shaped, interpreted, and replayed across the country. Yet amidst the chaos, one truth remained undeniable. Harrison Ford's walkout had achieved what few anticipated. He had shifted the conversation from film promotion to a larger discussion about personal integrity, public responsibility, and the dynamics of media confrontation. The aftermath was not merely about anger or applause, it was a catalyst for reflection, debate, and, for some, inspiration. The storm was far from over. As the news cycle churned and social media buzzed, the question lingered: had Ford silenced critics or ignited a firestorm that would continue to challenge both him and the audience in ways no one could yet predict? Within hours of Harrison Ford's dramatic exit, the conversation spilled far beyond the studio walls. Television panels buzzed with analysis, social media feeds exploded with hashtags, and news websites plastered every frame of the confrontation across their homepages. The incident had become more than a walkout, it was now a cultural flashpoint, a mirror reflecting the tension between celebrity influence, personal principle, and public expectation. Celebrities weighed in almost immediately. A well-known actor tweeted, "Integrity doesn't need applause. Respect to Harrison Ford for knowing the difference." Musicians, writers, and public figures chimed in, some defending Ford's right to choose when and how to engage with political issues, others critiquing him for walking away from dialogue that could have mattered. Each post, each comment, added layers to the growing narrative, reinforcing the polarized lens through which the public viewed the event. Political analysts were equally engaged, dissecting the cultural and ideological implications. Late-night hosts joked about the tension, but beneath the humor was a serious examination. What responsibility did public figures truly have in shaping discourse? "We live in an era where silence is no longer neutral," one commentator said. Ford's walkout forces a conversation about the expectations we place on individuals who wield influence, regardless of their primary profession. News outlets scoured archives, highlighting moments in Ford's career when he had previously spoken out on causes or stayed silent. "Is this consistent with his past behavior?" asked one headline. Critics pointed to his advocacy for environmental issues as evidence of selective engagement, while defenders emphasized the difference between deliberate action and performative commentary. The debate became a viral phenomenon, with clips, memes, and discussion threads multiplying faster than anyone could track. Behar's role in the event was dissected with equal intensity. Interviews with former colleagues and media analysts examined her approach. Was she holding Ford accountable, or was the confrontation driven by ratings? Opinion was sharply divided. Some applauded her courage to press a legendary actor on sensitive topics. Others condemned her perceived aggressiveness, suggesting it pushed the interaction into unprofessional territory. Every gesture, word, and facial expression from that episode became part of a complex narrative, being reconstructed in real time. Public discourse extended beyond media circles. Social media users engaged in debates that ranged from civility in interviews to the ethics of celebrity responsibility. Forums and discussion boards lit up, echoing arguments about principle versus performance, engagement versus silence, and the fine line between respectful inquiry and antagonism. The incident became a case study in the volatile mix of personality, power, and public perception in the digital age. Yet amid the swirl of commentary, admiration for Ford's composure persisted. Observers noted the calculated restraint in his walkout, the deliberate pace, the controlled body language, the unwavering focus on principle. "He made a statement without shouting," a columnist wrote. "That's a rare form of power in today's media landscape." As night fell and news cycles continued to churn, it was clear that Ford and Behar had created something far greater than an interview. They had ignited a national conversation, one that would ripple through talk shows, news commentary, and social media debates for weeks. The public's reactions were not just reactions, they were an ongoing dialogue about integrity, expectation, and the complex role of public figures in an age of instant scrutiny, away from the cameras and the flashing lights. Harrison Ford's private suite felt quiet, almost unnervingly still. The echo of the studio, the murmurs of the audience, and the digital uproar from millions of viewers seemed distant now, replaced by a contemplative silence. He sank into a leather chair, running a hand through his hair, the weight of the day pressing against his shoulders in a way that no public applause or criticism could ease. For Ford, the walkout had been both necessary and unsettling. The act itself, deliberate and precise, had projected strength, but in the aftermath, he could not escape the subtle tension of introspection. Was he truly justified? Had he made a statement that served principle, or had he allowed personal frustration to dictate public action? The question circled in his mind with the persistence of a storm tide. His assistant entered quietly, tablet in hand, showing him the immediate flood of reactions, tweets, news clips, headlines, and commentary. "It's everywhere," she said, a faint edge of concern in her voice. "People are calling it a stand, some are calling it inappropriate." Ford nodded, eyes fixed on the screen, taking in the polarized opinions with measured calm. "Let them talk," he said, his tone reflective. "I know what I meant to communicate." The conversation shifted inward. He thought of the countless moments in his career when public expectation clashed with personal conviction. Awards, interviews, public appearances, each had demanded a performance, a careful calibration of words and image. Today, that calibration had been tested, and for once, the decision to walk away had been irrevocable. His team discussed the potential fallout, but Ford remained centered on principle rather than optics. Focus on the work, he reminded them. The story we tell with our actions is stronger than any headline. They nodded, understanding the delicate balance of public perception, media scrutiny, and personal integrity. Ford's reflection extended beyond the immediate incident. He considered the culture of constant exposure, where silence is often weaponized as complicity, and every word is a potential headline. The storm of social media, the viral clips, and the endless commentary were part of the landscape now. Landscape he had navigated before, yet never with such direct intensity. He thought, too, of Joy Behar, her probing questions, and the palpable energy she had brought to the set. She had acted according to her principles, as he had according to his. The collision of those principles had sparked something explosive, but Ford's perspective remained tempered by nuance. Disagreement need not equate to malice, and confrontation need not erode respect entirely. By the end of the evening, Ford's reflections settled into a quiet resolve. He had acted in alignment with his values, choosing restraint, timing, and deliberate action over performative engagement. The public would debate, interpret, and judge, but he had acted authentically, on his own terms. In that private moment, away from cameras, commentary, and public expectation, he allowed himself a brief exhale. The storm had passed the set, but the inner clarity remained. For Harrison Ford, principle had been defended, and in the quiet behind the scenes, that mattered more than any headline, tweet, or viral clip. Back in her own quiet space, Joy Behar replayed the confrontation in her mind with a mixture of disbelief, frustration, and professional reflection. The energy in the studio had shifted in a heartbeat, and while she had anticipated some tension, she had not expected Ford to stand, pivot, and exit with such controlled finality. Her hands traced the rim of her coffee cup, the liquid untouched, as she considered the ripple effect of the exchange. "I thought I was pushing the conversation forward," she murmured, almost to herself. The questions she had asked, though pointed, had been designed to elicit honesty, to hold someone accountable in a moment of public scrutiny. Yet the result was far from the dialogue she had envisioned. Ford's calm defiance, the deliberate cadence of his refusal to engage, had reframed the narrative entirely. Behar reflected on the audience's reaction, the gasps, the subtle murmurs, the palpable tension in the room. For all her experience in live television, the walkout had caught her off guard, and the cameras had immortalized every fleeting expression. She could see now how every gesture, every pause, had been magnified, analyzed, and interpreted by millions. Her role, meant to provoke thought, had inadvertently fueled controversy. The social media storm was relentless. Clips of the confrontation circulated, dissected in threads and comment sections, each user weighing in with unfiltered opinions. Some applauded her courage to confront a legendary figure, while others criticized her approach as antagonistic, claiming she had overstepped. Behar read the critiques and accolades with an even hand, understanding that perception is often as impactful as intention. Behind the glare of headlines, she began to analyze her own choices. The tension she had sought to elicit from Ford had been met with a force she respected, though it challenged her professionally. She considered whether her questions had been too personal, too incisive, and whether the balance between accountability and provocation had been disrupted. The encounter was a reminder that in live television, every word carries weight, every glance conveys meaning, and every reaction can define public perception. Yet Behar also felt a grudging admiration. Ford's composure, the quiet authority in his decision to exit, was a masterclass in self-possession. He had shifted the conversation from the surface of film promotion to the deeper terrain of principle, integrity, and personal boundaries. She recognized the rare clarity of his stance, even as it left her momentarily disarmed in front of a national audience. As the evening drew on, Behar began crafting her response not for performance, but for reflection. She knew the media would call for statements, the public would seek explanations, and analysts would debate the morality of both participants. Yet, in the quiet of her own contemplation, she acknowledged the truth. Confrontation carries risk, and the measure of an exchange is often found in the integrity of those involved, not in the applause or outrage it generates. By nightfall, Behar had reached a somber acceptance. The confrontation was over, but the lessons lingered. The collision of principle, ego, and public expectation is never straightforward, and even a carefully orchestrated exchange can spiral into a moment that defines the narrative far beyond. The participants controlled. In the days following Harrison Ford's walkout, the incident transcended a single television appearance, embedding itself in cultural discourse. News cycles dissected every frame, social media churned with debates, and talk shows replayed the confrontation ad infinitum. The moment had become emblematic of a larger societal tension, the expectations placed on public figures, the boundaries of accountability, and the collision between personal conviction and performative culture. Analysts framed the event as a case study in integrity versus spectacle. In an era where visibility equals responsibility, Ford's decision to exit challenges conventional thinking, one commentator noted. The discussion extended beyond entertainment, touching political and ethical domains. Philosophers, journalists, and cultural critics debated whether refusing to participate in a performative exchange was an act of courage or a failure to engage. Clips of the interview circulated in classrooms, online forums, and panel discussions, prompting debates about civility, ethics, and the power dynamics inherent in live television. Fans and followers of Ford championed the walkout as a masterclass in restraint. He didn't yell, he didn't insult, he stood by his principles, one viral post read. Thousands echoed the sentiment, framing the moment as a lesson in measured response, self-respect, and personal agency. To them, the act had been a reminder that power need not be loud to be undeniable. Behar's critics and supporters engaged in parallel discourse. Some argued that her questions had been justified and necessary, an attempt to hold an influential figure accountable in a charged political moment. Others countered that her approach was antagonistic, misjudging the line between accountability and provocation. In every commentary, analysis, and meme, the tension between ethics, media responsibility, and personal boundaries remained central. The walkout sparked a broader dialogue on celebrity influence and social expectation. Cultural commentators highlighted how public figures are often scrutinized for their silence, regardless of their private actions or commitments. The discussion extended to other celebrities who had faced similar dilemmas, creating a pattern of analysis that questioned society's demand for instant visibility, soundbites, and public moral positioning. In entertainment circles, the incident became a benchmark for navigating live television. Producers, hosts, and journalists studied the sequence as a lesson in the unpredictable intersection of personality, principle, and public attention. Social media influencers dissected body language, cadence, and phrasing, turning the confrontation into a masterclass in communication strategy and tension management. Yet beyond analysis and debate, the cultural impact was profoundly human. The story resonated because it mirrored everyday dilemmas, the struggle to stand firm in the face of pressure, the balance between expression and restraint, and the courage to uphold principle even when misunderstood. Ford's walkout and Behar probing questions became a mirror, reflecting the complexities of negotiation, morality, and public expectation in a society that consumes moments as easily as opinions. By the end of the week, the episode had become more than was a touchstone. The images, the words, and the tension were replayed in homes, offices, and classrooms. Discussions continued, evolving beyond the initial controversy, and solidifying the event as a moment in cultural memory. It was a reminder that in the theater of public life, every action is amplified, every choice scrutinized, and every confrontation carries the potential to reshape narrative, perception, and legacy.